Because no one cared about your league before Caitlin Clark. There were no opposing fans. You barely had home fans. And so no one cared. A couple 300,000 people were watching your games before Caitlin Clark.
The WNBA is facing a crisis, and the numbers don't lie. Ratings have plummeted since Caitlin Clark was eliminated from the playoffs. With Clark no longer on the court, the league's fleeting surge in popularity has disappeared almost overnight. So what does this mean for the future of the WNBA? Is it doomed without her? Let's break down why Caitlin Clark was the league's lifeline, how the WNBA is spiraling in her absence, and whether it can survive without its biggest star. It's no secret that Caitlin Clark has been the WNBA's golden ticket. Her arrival in the league brought a wave of excitement the WNBA desperately needed. Let's talk numbers. Viewership skyrocketed when Clark played, and home attendance for the Indiana Fever hit record highs. Fans weren't just tuning in, they were investing in Clark. The fever pitch, no pun intended, surrounding her was unlike anything the WNBA had ever seen. But now with Clark out of the playoffs, that surge in interest has collapsed. Ratings are down, stadiums are quieter, and the league's grip on the mainstream audience is slipping fast. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA's marketability is crumbling. For years, the WNBA has struggled to break through the noise and capture the attention of the average sports fan. Sure, there are talented players across the league, but let's be honest, none of them have generated the kind of buzz Clark did in just her rookie season. The moment she was eliminated, it became clear just how much the league was relying on her to pull in viewers and pack arenas. The ratings nosedive is a direct reflection of how vital Clark was to the league's brief success. The WNBA has been in this position before. For years, it's tried to build a sustainable fan base, but struggled to keep audiences engaged. And then Caitlin Clark came along, and for a moment, it seemed like the WNBA had found its savior. But now, without her in the playoffs, we're back to square one. The excitement is gone, and the league is quickly losing the attention it so desperately needs. Can the WNBA survive without her? Based on the instant ratings crash, it doesn't look promising. Here's where things get even more dramatic. There's a real disconnect between the WNBA community and the broader audience that Clark brought in. Sheryl Swoopes and other insiders within the league have downplayed Clark's impact, almost as if they don't want to acknowledge that she's been carrying the league's popularity on her back. It's a strange and troubling situation. While fans and media are hailing Clark as the future of the WNBA, some within the league seem hesitant to embrace her stardom. Could it be jealousy? Fear of the new generation overshadowing the veterans? Whatever it is, it's becoming clear that not everyone in the WNBA is on board with Caitlin Clark being the face of the league. But here's where things take an even darker turn. What if the WNBA is sabotaging itself by not fully embracing Clark's star power? By refusing to recognize her influence and rally behind her, the league is missing a crucial opportunity to sustain its growth. Instead, they're allowing internal politics and egos to get in the way of what could be the WNBA's big break into mainstream sports. This disconnect between the league's leadership and its fans could be the very thing that sends the WNBA into a deeper decline. And let's not forget the controversies surrounding Caitlin Clark and how they've been handled. From accusations against her fans to the league's mishandling of incidents involving Clark and other players, it's clear that the WNBA's management is struggling to keep up. There's been talk that Clark's fans have been unfairly labeled and targeted, painting them as part of the problem rather than embracing the massive audience she's brought in. The WNBA's leadership seems to be more focused on playing politics than on supporting the player who's bringing them the most attention. This mismanagement has hurt the league's image and could be turning off the very fans who were ready to rally behind Clark and the WNBA. Now let's speculate a bit further. What happens to the WNBA if Caitlin Clark doesn't come back next season? Or worse, if she decides to go overseas to play in Europe? We've already seen the effects of her elimination from the playoffs. Without her, ratings are crashing and the excitement around the league is fading. If Clark were to leave the WNBA entirely, it could spell disaster for a league that's already struggling to keep its head above water. The WNBA has always had difficulty competing with the major men's sports leagues. And without a superstar like Clark to draw in casual fans, the league could fall back into obscurity. The financial implications are staggering. Less viewership means less revenue, fewer sponsorships, and decreased ad sales. With Caitlin Clark off the court, the WNBA is losing its biggest selling point. Major brands are far less likely to invest in a league that's failing to keep fans engaged. And let's be real, if Clark's not playing, those fans aren't showing up. It's a simple equation. No Clark, no fans, no money. The WNBA's fragile financial health is teetering, and without her, it could collapse. What's worse is that this isn't just a short-term problem. Caitlin Clark isn't just a great player. She's a cultural phenomenon. She brought a fresh energy to the WNBA that was appealing to both die-hard sports fans and casual viewers alike. Her absence leaves a gaping hole that no other player seems ready to fill. The league's long-term growth was hinging on her continued dominance. But now that she's out, the WNBA is being exposed for its inability to attract and retain a broader audience without a superstar like Clark leading the charge. So what's next? Does the WNBA face another season of declining ratings, empty arenas, and a diminishing fan base if Caitlin Clark doesn't return to the spotlight? It's looking that way. Without her, the league risks fading into irrelevance, becoming nothing more than a niche interest for a small group of dedicated fans. The WNBA's moment in the sun was brief, and now, without its brightest star, it could be heading back into the shadows. The WNBA is at a crossroads. With Caitlin Clark eliminated, the league is already seeing a dramatic decline in ratings and fan engagement. Can the WNBA recover without its biggest star, or is this the beginning of the end? If Caitlin Clark doesn't return, will the league survive? The stakes couldn't be higher, and only time will tell if the WNBA can find a way out of this disaster. Stay tuned, because the future of the WNBA could depend on Caitlin Clark's next move.
Us as black women, Paige reminds me a lot of you. Like, you say you're not really about me. And she knows how her privilege has gotten her to that point. And also, like, she's good at basketball, obviously. But, like, she understands her privilege. It's like what pushes her over the top, in a sense. It reminds me a lot of you. And I mean, that's a compliment.
A'ja Wilson has been vocal about privilege in the WNBA, specifically calling out players like Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers. But here's the twist. Wilson's comments come across as hypocritical when you consider her own background of privilege. While she's lecturing others about race and privilege, it's time we take a closer look at her own story and the narrative she's pushing. Let's dive into why A'ja Wilson's remarks feel like a double standard and why players like Caitlin Clark deserve more credit for their success. A'ja Wilson's recent comments about privilege, particularly aimed at players like Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers, have sparked quite a conversation.
Everything A'ja Wilson is saying I probably tend to think it wasn't even on accident. Knew she was being recorded, knew it would get out there.
Wilson mentioned how Bueckers and Clark have benefited from privilege, especially in terms of race, saying she knows how her privilege has guided her to that point, and obviously she's good at basketball. While Wilson acknowledged their talent, she implied that their rise to fame has been smoothed by privilege, which seems ironic when you consider Wilson's own privileged background. Wilson is a product of private education, with access to elite resources that helped her develop her skills from a young age. She attended a private school and had the benefit of a strong support system, a luxury that many players in the WNBA didn't have. There's no question that she's worked hard to get where she is, but to position herself as someone who had to overcome insurmountable obstacles while lecturing others on privilege feels disingenuous.
The sense of entitlement and the sour, bad, nasty attitudes that many of these players are exhibiting, I think exactly is one of the reasons why for the past 20 some odd years, nobody has cared about this league, why there is certainly an antipathy towards it.
The racial dynamics in sports are complex and worthy of discussion, but Wilson's framing makes it seem like she's ignoring her own advantages while trying to play the victim. Now contrast that with Caitlin Clark, who's emerged as one of the most exciting and hardworking players the WNBA has seen in years. Clark's rise hasn't been because of some invisible hand of privilege. It's been because of her sheer talent and relentless drive. She's smashing records, breaking barriers, and doing it all without leaning on a narrative of advantage. Clark's focus has always been on her game and her performance. She's not out there positioning herself as someone who's benefited from privilege or using social commentary to explain her success. It's her dedication, not a handout, that has gotten her to the top of the WNBA. But here's where things get even more interesting: endorsements and shoe deals. Recently, A'ja Wilson landed a signature shoe deal with Nike, something many athletes dream of. But let's ask the tough question: was Wilson the right choice? If Nike were looking for the most marketable player, the most deserving candidate, Caitlin Clark would have been the obvious choice. She has the fan base, the game-changing talent, and the stats to back it all up. So why did Nike go with Wilson? Some speculate that it was more about aligning with a narrative than rewarding the player who's truly making waves in the league.
A'ja Wilson has a signature shoe and logo with Nike. No one's gonna buy her shoe, no one cares, but Nike's bending over backwards trying to please A'ja Wilson and Don Staley and the whole BLM crowd we gotta promote A'ja first.
Caitlin Clark's popularity is undeniable. Her games are drawing record-breaking viewership, her social media presence is through the roof, and fans are flocking to support her wherever she goes. In contrast, Wilson, despite her accomplishments, hasn't been able to command the same level of attention. And yet, Nike chose Wilson for the shoe deal, overlooking the player who is quite literally bringing more eyes to the WNBA than ever before. It's hard not to see this as a strategic choice to back a player who fits a certain narrative rather than the one who is actually transforming the league. But let's speculate for a moment. What if Caitlin Clark's rise and success are making people in the WNBA uncomfortable? What if her dominance on the court, combined with her massive popularity, is starting to overshadow players like A'ja Wilson, whose star power might be fading in comparison? Is it possible that Wilson's comments about privilege are an attempt to regain control of the narrative, to shift the focus back to herself as a leader in the league?
And so there's a mindset that A'ja has to adopt to justify getting treatment she knows she doesn't deserve.
By framing the conversation around race and privilege, Wilson may be trying to reposition herself as the voice of the WNBA, despite the fact that Clark is doing more to elevate the game. And let's not forget the racial undertones in this conversation. By making privilege a focal point, Wilson is drawing a clear line between herself and Clark, implying that Clark's success is somehow less deserved because of her background. But if we really break it down, it's Clark who's had to fight for everything she's achieved. While Wilson had the benefit of private schooling and a strong support network, Clark's success has come purely from her on-court excellence and relentless work ethic. So who's really benefiting from privilege here? The controversy surrounding Wilson's comments doesn't stop at her background or her endorsements. There's another layer to this: the way fans and media are reacting. While Clark's fan base continues to grow, Wilson's influence seems to be waning. Look at the viewership numbers. Look at the jersey sales. It's Caitlin Clark who is driving the WNBA's growth right now, not Wilson. And yet, the league and brands like Nike continue to push Wilson as the face of the WNBA. Is it because they're afraid to embrace Clark's growing influence? Are they reluctant to shift the spotlight onto the player who is, by all metrics, the more marketable and impactful figure? This brings us to another question. Is the WNBA itself holding Caitlin Clark back? While she continues to break records and draw attention to the league, could the powers that be downplaying her achievements to avoid upsetting the balance of established stars like Wilson? If the league were truly about elevating the best and brightest, Caitlin Clark would already be the face of the WNBA. Instead, it feels like there's a reluctance to fully embrace her rise. Could Wilson's comments be a reflection of this underlying tension within the league, where newer, younger stars like Clark threaten to disrupt the established order? This entire situation feels like a brewing storm, with Caitlin Clark at the center. While A'ja Wilson tries to control the narrative, Clark's undeniable talent and appeal are breaking through, whether the league likes it or not. If Wilson and others continue to push this idea of privilege, it could backfire, making them seem out of touch with the very fans and viewers the WNBA desperately needs. Meanwhile, Clark's star is only going to continue rising, and the question becomes, how long can the WNBA and players like Wilson ignore the real face of their future? A'ja Wilson's comments have opened a conversation about privilege, but the bigger question is, who is really benefiting from it? Caitlin Clark is breaking records and bringing in fans like never before. Yet it seems like the WNBA is hesitant to fully embrace her rise. Could Wilson's attempts to steer the narrative backfire, making her seem out of touch with where the league is headed? One thing's for sure, this battle for the spotlight is far from over, and the next chapter could change the face of the WNBA forever. Stay tuned.
This is a new beginning, it's a new start, and I think it's great for our franchise, it's great for our fans, and we're excited to see who can join us and help us as we continue to move forward and continue to be a great standard in the WNBA.
The Indiana Fever are at a crossroads. Kelly Koff has returned. Caitlin Clark is lighting up the league, but coaching struggles and looming free agency decisions have cast a shadow over their future. Will the Fever build a championship-caliber team around Clark, or will they crumble under the pressure? Stick around as we dive into the key factors shaping the Fever's future and the challenges they must overcome. The Fever's decision to bring back Kelly Koff to run the franchise signals a new chapter for the team. But for those familiar with the Fever's history, Koff is not just any executive. She was at the helm during their most successful years. Under Koff's leadership, the Fever reached the WNBA Finals multiple times, cementing themselves as one of the top franchises in the league. Now with the team struggling to find consistency, despite having a star like Caitlin Clark, Koff's return couldn't have come at a better time. Fans and analysts alike see her return as a turning point. She's known for making bold moves, and with her experience, there's hope that Koff will breathe new life into a team that's been underperforming. But there's no doubt, the pressure is on. The Fever's recent struggles have put them near the bottom of the standings, and many wonder if even Koff's expertise will be enough to rebuild the franchise. Will she be able to replicate her past success, or is the situation too far gone? It's impossible to talk about the Indiana Fever without mentioning Caitlin Clark. Since being drafted, Clark has quickly established herself as one of the league's most electrifying players. Her deep three-pointers, sharp court vision, and ability to make impossible plays have captured the attention of fans across the league. Clark has single-handedly brought the Fever into the spotlight, drawing in record-breaking attendance numbers and skyrocketing media attention. Clark isn't just a great player, she's a cultural phenomenon. Fans are showing up in droves, and the Fever are starting to see a fan base that hasn't been this engaged in years. It's not just about what Clark does on the court, it's her presence off the court that's been a game changer for the Fever. Merchandise sales are up, media interviews are flooding in, and suddenly a team that was once an afterthought is now the center of attention. But as impressive as Clark has been, the Fever's struggles raise concerns. Despite her star power, the team is still far from competing for a championship. This leads us to the next major issue, coaching. No discussion about the Fever's season would be complete without addressing the elephant in the room, head coach Christy Sides. While Sides was expected to bring a fresh perspective to the team, her tenure has been plagued by defensive struggles and questionable rotation management. Critics argue that Sides has failed to adjust her defensive strategies to match the talent on the roster, and as a result, the Fever have often been outplayed on that end of the floor. The lack of defensive intensity has been one of the team's biggest weaknesses, and much of that blame has fallen on Sides. There are growing concerns about whether she's the right coach to lead this team, especially with a generational talent like Caitlin Clark on the roster. Clark has been forced to carry a heavy load on both ends of the floor, often overworked in games where she should be getting more support from her teammates. Sides' inability to manage rotations effectively has further raised questions about her future. Players like Kelsey Mitchell, who should be taking pressure off Clark, have been inconsistent in their minutes and roles. If sides can't figure out a way to balance the workload and improve the team's defensive schemes, her future with the Fever could be in jeopardy. With Clark's immediate impact, the Fever are feeling the pressure to build a competitive team around her, and fast. It's clear that Clark has the potential to lead this team to a championship, but she can't do it alone. The Fever's front office, now led by Kelly Koff, has its work cut out for them. The current roster needs major improvements, especially on the defensive end, if the team is going to contend for a title. The focus is not just on finding talent, but on building a roster that maximizes Clark's strengths. She's a dynamic scorer and playmaker, but without the right pieces around her, the Fever will continue to struggle. The team's defensive shortcomings have been well documented, and finding players who can step up on that end will be crucial. But it's not just about defense. The Fever need players who can take the load off Clark offensively as well. There's a growing sense that time is ticking. Clark is a franchise-altering player, and the Fever can't afford to waste her prime years. The pressure is on the front office to make the right moves, whether that's through trades, free agency, or the draft. If they don't, they risk losing the momentum Clark has brought to the franchise. One of the biggest challenges facing the Fever is the uncertainty around key players like Kelsey Mitchell. Mitchell has been a vital part of the team's offense, but she's approaching free agency, and there are questions about whether the Fever can retain her. Losing Mitchell would be a significant blow, especially given the need to build a competitive roster around Clark. But it's not just Mitchell. The Fever's future hinges on whether they can develop a balanced roster that complements Clark's skill set. Players like Aaliyah Boston and Nalissa Smith have shown flashes of potential, but consistency has been an issue. The team needs to figure out which pieces will be part of their long-term plans and which ones need to be replaced. As Mitchell's free agency approaches, the Fever are facing a critical offseason. Can they convince her to stay? Or will the team be forced to rebuild around Clark without one of their top offensive weapons? It's a decision that could have lasting consequences for the franchise. The future of the Indiana Fever is hanging in the balance. Will Kelly Koff's return be enough to turn things around? Can the team build a championship roster around Caitlin Clark? The answers to these questions could make or break the Fever's chances of rising to the top of the WNBA. Only time will tell if this is the beginning of a new era for the Fever, or just another missed opportunity.
WNBA is getting a new team, the Golden State Valkyries. The team is set to make a slam dunk on the court in 2025.
The Indiana Fever are on the verge of a major shakeup. With the WNBA expansion draft looming, star players like Caitlin Clark could be at risk of leaving not just the team, but the league entirely. Will the Fever manage to hold on to their core, or is this the beginning of an era-defining exodus? Stick around as we dive into how the Fever's future is hanging by a thread, with crucial roster decisions and overseas opportunities threatening to change everything. The expansion draft for the Golden State Valkyries is the hot topic in the WNBA right now, and its implications for teams like the Indiana Fever are massive. Every team will lose one player to the new franchise, and for a team like the Fever that's struggling to find consistency, this could be a devastating blow. The Fever's roster has already faced its fair share of challenges, but now the expansion draft is about to add another layer of uncertainty. Losing a key contributor to the draft could stall the progress the Fever have made, especially with Caitlin Clark leading the way. Teams can only protect 6 players, so tough choices are going to have to be made. And with the Valkyries eyeing talent across the league, the Fever must prepare for the possibility of losing someone vital to their rotation. Whether it's a role player or a potential breakout star, this draft could disrupt everything the Fever have been building. Caitlin Clark has been the cornerstone of the Fever's resurgence, transforming them from a team near the bottom of the standings into a must-watch franchise. Her impact goes beyond just stats. She's drawing fans, media attention, and bringing new life to a team that desperately needed it. However, there's a growing concern that Clark's time in the WNBA might not last as long as fans would hope. Clark has hinted at frustrations with the WNBA's structure and the lack of respect she's faced, both as a player and as a leader in the league. The low salaries in the WNBA compared to overseas opportunities add fuel to the fire. European leagues, particularly in countries like Spain, Turkey, and Russia, offer much more lucrative contracts. As a result, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Clark could be swayed to leave the WNBA for financial stability and more professional respect overseas. If the Fever lose Clark, it wouldn't just be a blow to the team, it would be a huge loss for the WNBA as a whole. The league has struggled to retain top talent, and Clark's departure would send shockwaves through the entire WNBA landscape. The Fever's front office is aware of this threat, but whether they can do enough to keep Clark committed to the WNBA remains a huge question mark. With the expansion draft on the horizon, the Fever have a tough decision ahead. They can only protect 6 players. Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston are almost certainly locked in, but that leaves little room for the rest of the roster. Players like Lexi Hall, Melissa Smith, and Tammy Fag-Benley are in a precarious position, as the Fever will have to make tough choices on who to protect. The decision-making process won't be easy. Do they gamble and leave a promising young player unprotected? Or do they focus on securing veterans who can provide stability in the locker room? The expansion draft could easily reshape the Fever's roster overnight, and if the wrong player is left unprotected, the team could face setbacks for seasons to come. Managing this situation effectively is crucial for the Fever's future success. One of the biggest challenges for the WNBA right now is player salaries. Compared to international leagues, the WNBA offers significantly lower pay, which has led to many top players considering or outright leaving for overseas opportunities. Gabby Williams is just one example, having recently left the WNBA for a more lucrative deal abroad. This growing trend has WNBA executives worried about player retention, especially with the league expanding. For players like Caitlin Clark, who is already one of the biggest names in basketball, the financial discrepancy between the WNBA and overseas leagues is a significant concern. While the WNBA has made strides in marketing and exposure, it still struggles to offer competitive salaries, particularly for players looking to maximize their earning potential during their peak playing years. If the league can't address this, more stars may follow in Gabby Williams' footsteps, leaving for higher-paying contracts overseas. This would not only hurt the Fever, but could also put the entire WNBA at a disadvantage in retaining its top talent. Looking ahead, the Fever's front office has some tough decisions to make. Free agency is fast approaching, and they'll need to decide which underperforming players to cut and which ones to retain for the future. The potential loss of Kelsey Mitchell in free agency would be devastating, especially if the team can't fill her role with a similarly impactful player. Add in the uncertainty surrounding the expansion draft, and the Fever's roster could look very different by the time next season tips off. Speculation is rampant about which players will stay and who might be on the way out. Underperforming players are likely to be cut, and the Fever will need to be strategic in finding replacements that fit well alongside Clark and Boston. This offseason could mark a pivotal moment for the Fever. Do they try to make one big splash in free agency, or do they focus on developing young talent to build a sustainable core for the future? The stakes couldn't be higher for the Fever as they navigate this delicate balancing act between retaining their current stars and building for long-term success. The Indiana Fever's future hangs in the balance. Will the team be able to survive the expansion draft without losing a key player? Will Caitlin Clark stay committed to the WNBA, or will overseas opportunities lure her away? And most importantly, can the Fever assemble a roster that's ready to compete for a championship? All eyes are on the Fever as they prepare for a potentially franchise-defining offseason. Stay tuned as this drama unfolds, because the future of the Fever, and maybe even the WNBA itself, depends on it.